I guess you said.
Nice.
Okay.
We've got some folks online.
Hey. Welcome, welcome. I love how we're calling this the bonus global talk. That's really fun. All right, shall we get started? Okay, great. So welcome everyone to the Center for Global Studies. And we are going to hear today from Sina, who has come from very far away, all the way from Germany, and can just give this talk today. But yeah, so Sina is going to be talking about one part of her research that focuses on political narratives. So without further ado, I will acknowledge the territory, which is the land on which the university has been built, the campus has been built. So I would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen people, specifically the Songhees, Kosapsim, and Esquimalt and Wasanich people who still hold a strong connection with this land and have a very long and rich history on this land. So the University of Victoria has worked a lot with these people and other Indigenous people. And I would say that I'm very proud to say that UVic is, despite the challenging history and complex history, UVic is quite a leader when it comes to truth and reconciliation. That is an ongoing process in Canada. I don't know if you've heard about the UVic Indigenous Law School, but it's actually the first law center in the world to combine the study of Indigenous and non-Indigenous law. I would also encourage any visitors, especially visitors from abroad, to visit the First People's House here on campus. It's kind of giving a little bit more of a holistic insight into what's happening in terms of reconciliation also on campus. So respectfully acknowledging all that work that's ongoing. All right, so just to introduce Sina, and I'm very, very honored to introduce Sina because we actually did our PhDs together so many years ago. And it was wonderful. We were both in Freiburg and we created this like women PhD group that would get together on a regular basis and support each other in the struggle. It's a struggle for anyone doing a PhD, I'd say, right? So you're not alone. So Sina is a visiting scholar here for about 3 months. So please take the time to reach out after this event and talk about your research as well. I'm sure she'd be very interested. So Sina has a very incredible background. She has spent her entire career in academia, and after going to the University of Freiburg, she is now head of environmental politics at the Center for Environmental Research and in Dresden. It's Leipzig. Okay. Oh, yes, of course. But isn't the center the Heimward Center? No.
It's in Leipzig.
Oh, okay. Okay. So she is at the University Head of Environmental Politics in Leipzig, but also has a professorship position at another research center at the University in Jena. She has very many titles that are very accomplished. And
Whatever.
Trust whatever she says.
Briefly accomplished, and this is pretty incredible to have her here today. So I will let Sina talk about her research rather than introducing any further. So thank you so much, Sina, for being with us today.
Morning, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm honored to speak about my research today, and I very much look forward to the discussion and hearing also more about what you guys do. So today I want to talk about a question that has been central to my work since quite some years now. So how can we as scientists harness the power of narratives in sustainability transformations? So as I work in environmental politics, sustainability transformation is like, let's say, the big buzzword we use in Europe to describe new regulations, new policies in order to foster a more sustainable lifestyle. There are many definitions out there, so I won't use a definition. And I'm going to start with a question for you guys, actually. So, who of you agrees with this statement? Society's environmental impacts will be reduced if we all stop using single-use products like this cup. Can we have a show of hands? Okay, very reluctant at first, and then convinced. Okay, it's a very mixed audience in here. I cannot see anyone online, so I'm going to take
Let's
this
see.
picture. Okay, I guess no matter what your specific opinion about this statement is, you're probably very familiar with the underlying political narrative about it. Like every good narrative or story, it starts with an exposition. Us, the wasteful consumer. It has a rising action. We produce lots and lots of waste, we pollute the landscape, we create environmental problems everywhere.
This is what Kelly said. Your
Okay,
question.
great. Then it has a climax. Okay, the climax takes a while. Okay. We should just act and refuse this waste and use, for instance, reusable cups and be good consumers. And with that, actually help solve the problem. Move producers, produce different things, move away from single-use products, and eventually reach very beautiful waste-free landscapes. So this is like the archetypical story behind that. And it presents us with a clear hero, which is us. So we change our behavior and are the hero, or we are part of the problem if we do not. So it presents us also with a clear moral of what to do and how to act in the future. And this is a typical way political narratives are structured. You can find it anywhere in political debates about any topic. So as scientists, obviously, we study these narratives and we try to find out, okay, what's behind them and to what extent do they hold. And our research in Germany and Europe found that actually often this story has a couple of holes. So for instance, single-use products are often substituted with cups like this. However, this cup is made of steel, so it has much higher impacts, environmental impacts when you produce it than just a single-use cup. This means you have to use it many, many times to actually offset the environmental impacts you would create with a single-use product. And secondly, I'm not sure about you guys, but I have actually many of these sitting in my cupboard unused because I get them as presents in conferences, or sometimes, you lose one, you have to buy a new one, and so on. So again, you create higher environmental impacts. And thirdly, in Europe, you often get a discount on your drink when you bring this cup. So they give me, 20% off or whatever. At the same time, they often offer me like highly priced chocolates or small things to come with it because I save money, right? So again, they incentivize me to create higher environmental impact. It's often like luxury chocolates or whatever you get there. So as you can see, the story is not as easy as it is being told. Yet as scientists, we are often encouraged to tell these easy stories. So we often simplify, we connect to buzzwords like sustainability, resilience, and so on. And we try to develop convincing messages for policy and society. And there's actually a lot of research supporting us in this storytelling. So we can get across the right narrative to foster sustainability transformations. And here's a bit of an overview. This is some of the most established research, I'd say, about how to create convincing narratives, how you get your messages across, what you can do to foster whatever message you want to create with a narrative. So you have to pay attention to the setting, your characters, so who's your hero, who's the villain, how does the plot develop, and do you have a very clear moral? Probably every one of us does that in your papers, right? When you write a paper, this is what you also look for. Then you can use very ambiguous central concepts, such as sustainability or circular economy. So my research is a lot on circular economy. It sounds clear-cut, but it's equally ambiguous. You can create links to historical or current events. I'm not sure, like usually when I write a paper, I often start off with, some current event that was very related, political event or a natural catastrophe or whatever. Then you present a consistent and coherent problem, right? You boil it down and you present a clear moral. Then you can often use easy and emotion-evoking language. It's a bit more difficult maybe in a scientific paper, but in media, for instance, this is often used. And then you often also use metaphors and symbols to create connections and get your problem across. And then there's also a lot of strategies you can use to make the narrative more convincing or to present it well to audience and connect to audiences. And this is also research that I did for the past 15 years, trying to understand, okay, what kind of strategies can you use to get narratives across? There's, for instance, developing counter narratives to currently existing ones, so that present an alternative, for instance. Then you can split up your audience. I call it divide and conquer. So have different groups of public. So people more interested in recycling, for instance, and people supporting. So dividing different roles and making clear who the hero and the villain in your story is, for instance. Then you often exclude elements. So the story needs to be easy and simplified. So you exclude a lot of different things. Then you can emotionalize or rationalize. So finding scientific data supporting your argument, for instance, or using emotional images such as the panda bear or, cute little animals. Often used by NGOs when they communicate, for instance, environmental issues through cute little animals. Then, as I mentioned, like presenting a clear moral is also a strong strategy. And then also relabeling problems. So redescribing what the problem is actually about. And then there are a couple of other strategies, but these are the main ones I wanted to introduce here. However, after doing this research for quite some time, I felt that this kind of storytelling and usage of narratives can often reside in what I call the AHAB approach. And since we are here in Victoria, I call it the Ahab approach. And I think you're probably all familiar with this classic novel, Moby Dick. So it's about Captain Ahab, who initially gets ambushed by a whale. So the whale basically bites off one of his legs. And after that, he becomes crazy trying to find the whale and kill it. And he sails the sea for a couple of years, and eventually the climax of the story is he finds the whale and tries to kill it. But he doesn't succeed. So the whale basically destroys his entire ship and the crew with him. And there's a sole survivor, Ishmael, he's the narrator in the story, and telling the story in the end, making this book out of it. And presenting us with a clear moral of what you shouldn't do. So it's basically about Ahab's obsession of finding and killing the whale. And eventually, so this pursuit blinds him to his duties, to the safety of his crew, to any joys of life, and eventually drags him and the entire crew into two. So I'm arguing, this is an extreme metaphor, but I'm arguing if you use narratives in the way I just presented to steer discourse, to influence political discourse, you have to be very careful to also not be blinded to, let's say, the risks of presenting these simple narratives. So there's actually quite a bit of research that shows that narratives come with considerable risks in political and societal debates. So they can oversimplify, they can exclude a lot of voices since they simplify. They can create fatigue of debate, so people don't want to talk about it anymore. And And they can also fuel conflict and polarization in political debates. So actually stalling political development and dividing groups. So to address these risks, I was thinking, okay, what else can you do? Because you do not get rid of narratives. They will always be there. So what to do about it? So my team and I, over the last 5 years, developed what we call narrative-led dialogues. And these are meant not to steer the discourse, but to actually navigate it. So not like Captain Ahab, but more like Ishmael, maybe. So that people can use narratives to understand the issue better, connect to each other, and communicate in polarized debates. And the narrative-led dialogues have basically 3 stages. So one is recognition. So you first need to identify the narratives in a political debate, contextualize it a bit so you can understand it. The second step is then analyze it. Okay, what are synergies and contradictions between these narratives? And the third one is actually engagement. So sharing these narratives with your audience, be it political or social stakeholders or even scientists, and trying to engage in it, trying to find synergies, but also contradictions and ways to deal with these. We are currently using this approach in a couple of research projects, mainly at the European level, when it comes about regulating European chemicals. This is why there's this guy. And also at water governance issues in a local setting in Germany. And since this approach is very abstract, I wanted to show you an example of what we did a couple of years back with a community of scientists researching on the circular economy. So for everyone not familiar with the concept, circular economy is often termed as reducing, reusing, or recycling resources. And it's a very popular concept at the European level, but also at the OECD and UN, and also in many countries. And it's being used as a political concept increasingly to manage water, food, pollution, as well as resource scarcity. So the idea is to keep resources in the loop, let's say, for as long as possible, to extract less and to also produce less waste. And there is a huge body of research about the circular economy. And this being the case, so in 2022, we reached out to the most prominent scholars researching on circular economy. So there were 101 based on their publication records, and 54 of them got back to us from all over the world and from these different disciplines. So they self-identified their discipline. And we asked them, okay, what are your main findings about circular economy? And how is it politically relevant? And how would you foster policies for circular economy? And based on their answers, so it was a quite extensive survey. Based on their answers, we identified 3 core narratives that the scientists produced, let's say. One we called the optimist, who has a strong belief in technical solutions like recycling or reusable products as a key to sustainability. The second one we call the skeptic, who doubts the effectiveness of technical solutions altogether, saying they will not help us if we don't reduce, for instance, our environmental footprints. This will not really help us. And then the third position we call the reformist, who hopes for transformative potential of the circular economy, but only if political framework conditions are established, for instance, to mitigate greenwashing effects or rebound effects. So this is a bit more detailed. You don't have to read all the details. I'm going to go through it. What I want to highlight here is that all 3 of these narratives, so they obviously have some synergies, but they definitely also have contradictions. And they provide you with clear heroes. So who's the hero of the story? In the optimist story, it's definitely technology and businesses, entrepreneurship and developing new technologies will move us forward to more recycling, more reuse, and it will help us be more sustainable. The reformist clearly sees the state and rules, so establishing clear rules about what is allowed, when, what is not allowed, for instance, greenwashing, and only this will help us create a meaningful and sustainable circular economy. And the third one has very strong focus on communities, saying that local communities or cities and social initiatives will eventually be much better than recycling or reusing, because they will tackle issues of resource use reduction. So they all present us with a very different moral of what to do. And they reveal structured contradictions. And with these contradictions, they clearly also show you what each narrative systematically overlooks. So for instance, the reformist and the optimist basically have a huge disagreement about regulation. So the optimist argues the need to deregulate, not to make space for technology and businesses, innovation to develop. Whereas the reformist says no, more regulation. You need to make sure that these businesses don't just do anything, they do what we want them to do. Then a second contradiction is about decoupling. Do you guys know what decoupling is? More or less? So this decoupling is the idea that you can decouple economic growth from environmental impacts. So you have less environmental impacts, but more growth, for instance, through service models or whatever. And the reformist strongly believes that decoupling is something that you can do with regulation, so you can achieve this. And the skeptic actually says it's not possible, it has never been proven, get rid of this idea altogether. And then the third important contradiction we found is social and environmental benefits. The optimist believes that if you have entrepreneurship and technological innovation, it will automatically create social and environmental benefits. By new business models, new markets will automatically have they kind of fall off on the side, let's say. Whereas the skeptic says, if you don't prioritize social and environmental benefits, whatever you create here will never produce them automatically. So there is like huge disagreements here. So what we did with these and with the narratives, we presented them to the community that we engaged with, so these 54 scholars, and we did the engagement stage on what to do next and how to work with them. And the result was basically that parts of the industrial ecology community, which is the largest community researching on circular economy, shifted their focus of work from how a circular economy and circular economy strategies can be achieved towards where and when they actually make sense. So they really reshifted their debate. We created even a new, let's say, chapter in the major society for this community in order to address these issues more, organized conferences, and so on. So it really made them change some of their viewpoints on their own research. So coming back to my initial question, how can scientists actually harness the power of narratives in sustainability transformation? So present narratives, but don't fall prey to their risks. So I argue basically two things. Using narratives to steer this discourse is a legitimate practice, like we all do it, everyone does it, it's very hard to escape. And there's actually plenty of research that you can use to support it. But I argue that narrative-led dialogues can actually complement that practice and can help mitigate their risks and open new pathways for environmental politics or sustainability transformation debates. By actually getting the community together, highlighting their hidden values and assumptions, as well as some of the consequences of their own narrative strategies that they use. So I wanted to share some of the testimonies, let's say, about when we used our research in different projects. And it was very interesting to listen what people had to say. So one of the participants said, for instance, it was the first time I ever talked to the other side. Whatever this means. Like really engaging with people who have a very different opinion or different conviction. Another participant shared that it revealed a broader cloud of truth. So he meant that, truth is not always like the singular thing, but it has different dimensions. Another participant actually in the project in Germany shared that it was a good way to build trust and actually reduce fears between the groups. And some also had revelations like, oh, I had no idea the industry was also in favor, was also seeing it the same way as I was. I always thought there was a division when actually there was none. So it helped people to move a little bit beyond their own perspective.
So, question on that last.
Yeah.
I missed the part. So they're talking about a process that they've just been through, or what are they referring to? An engagement process or something?
Yeah, these were these. So the narrative-led dialogue thing. Okay, it's too many slides. So when we share these contradictions and the narratives, so this narrative-led dialogue about circular economy, but also we use it also in other examples, and I just shared from different examples these statements.
I wonder if they all got together for a conference or some discussion.
No, this was from different projects when we use narrative-led dialogues and what people found helpful.
When they talk to the other side, when did they get a chance to talk to the other side?
This was in the engagement stage. So we had the analysis stage when we analyzed, and then when we tried to find synergies and contradictions between them. And then eventually when we have people engage with these narratives. So the narratives about circular economy, for instance, that I showed. So we shared in several discussion rounds with the scholars, they were the basis of producing these narratives. And when they engaged with them, so these were some of the statements about the process. Okay. So this is actually my final statement about what to do. So I argue, let's not be like Ahab. Let's view narratives more like Moby Dick, so force of nature to be respected rather than, fought and individually fostered by single stories only. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sina. I think there's already some engagement from the floor, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks online who are very interested to have a discussion and then ask questions. So maybe I'll open the floor to whoever has a question or wants to share something. Yeah.
It was a small question. I was just gonna ask, you were saying how some of the larger group of researchers, their focus is kind of, you realize, shifted more towards like where it's really applicable for circular economy. So I was wondering what is like where you would be like, oh yeah, no, let's not even try. Like, is that what you're saying in terms of like it's not for every situation now, they're just trying to see like where would it be good?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes circular economy approaches, especially recycling, but also sharing, actually create higher environmental impacts than the linear approach, let's say. So sometimes it doesn't make sense because you need all the infrastructure, you need often a lot of energy, you need the transfer and so on. Yes. So sometimes it's even so the community says it often depends on the context.
Yeah.
So where does it come from? How much does it cost? So maybe in one country or one setting it may make sense, in another it doesn't make sense.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of like what's most dominant maybe in the EU, like with politicians, or in Germany or something? And do you think it could be mapped on very like cleanly to different
Maybe can we go back to the presentation?
Yeah.
We can have more problems. So role, I believe.
Oh my goodness. Sorry. There we go.
So this overview we gave, so we tried to condense statements by the scholars here. But I have done a lot of research also on stakeholder debates about circular economy in Germany and in Europe. And so the optimist is definitely by far the largest community. It overlaps quite a bit with the reformist, but this is more like a smaller, it's growing. But it's definitely this optimist stance, and you can actually find some of these statements almost by word in like EU documents. So this is the general agreement, and I think this is also why some of the community said that for the first time they talked to the other side, like the other side would be more like this one. So this is questioning a lot actually this work, and there hasn't been too much interaction between these scholars. Because the communities are also a little bit different. So that really made a difference for the community to like engage across these different groups more. Yeah.
First, thank you so much. I think to me, the intersection of environment and politics is always interesting. And I just have a quick question regarding the AHAP approach. I mean, kind of criticizing it. To me, is like criticizing scientists that always are criticizing, the root causes of environmental problems. Like always, we are studying like capitalism, okay, like the root causes. And in this diagram also, I can see that, I mean, root causes is not part of the research. So my question is that, do you intentionally just, just set them aside that don't look at the root causes? And is this a different approach, or do you believe that we need to always address the root causes of environmental problems?
They do talk about the root causes quite a lot. So this is regulation like huge thing, and then the decoupling. So environmental, what creates environmental impacts and what doesn't is like about
it's almost in a state, it's in the state level. So states are kind of representative of the broader political economy or capitalism, or even if we just look at a bit, deeper, or kind of colonialism, for example. All the time is like that. Okay, consumerism is the root cause. So we look at the consumer, which kind of crop they are using, as you started, and then expand your argument. But I mean, somehow we look at extractivism as a deep problem. But what about colonialism behind it? The starting point of these problems. Are you criticizing studying like this approach by calling AHAP or not? You
didn't criticize this approach. I think what you are talking about points out a very good limitation, or an interesting limitation of all of this work. So I'm criticizing that, if you have very narrow narratives and you stick to your narratives always, you get blinded to everything else, right? It happens easily to all of us. No one is immune, not scientists and not other people. This can also happen when you talk about colonialism, right? Like you might be blind to all the other issues that are there. So one issue with all of the narrative research and narratives in general is that they have a certain topic focus. So here and here actually were issues of scales and interconnections and north-south relations. So they did appear. They were part of the debate, but in general, the debate is focused on circular economy because you need to talk about something, like you cannot talk about everything all the time, right? So whenever you create your own narrative or do these dialogues, they have a certain focus. here you broaden the focus, but you cannot broaden it indefinitely, because then first, who do you talk to? Who is your audience? And then second, what other, then you have 100 different narratives, and then people are always bounded by these narratives to make sense and understand. So this is the root cause of the limitations of every approach working with narratives. But I would argue this is a limitation of every approach you can have, because the human mind is not able to understand the complexity of the world, right? So you have to, so this is working with, I would say, so we are trying to do our best to expand, but you cannot expand it indefinitely. Yeah.
I'm facilitating, so.
You don't have to put your hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Sina. I really like the approach of confronting scientific ground, but presenting scientists with narratives that they themselves are producing or reproducing in their research. And I was wondering a bit about the reactions that you got from your participants. So were they, so as the way I understood it, you had this analysis stage where you sort of identified, these are the narratives that they have and these stories that they work with this. Did the scientists who apparently produced them, were they surprised when you presented, or were they aware that they were creating these narratives? Did they maybe disagree that they were creating these narratives? I'm wondering a little bit how they felt when they were confronted with this.
Yeah, so there were some very interesting social developments, let's say, to share. So I intentionally said there was a part of the community that moved, tried to broaden the debate. And I think that these people had already felt it was like an intuition they had that some of the stuff might be relevant and they weren't able to grasp it. Mm-hmm. So I think I just gave them a tool to grasp it better. And some of the community, I think, wasn't so engaged or is maybe less able to engage, because some of the optimists' work is really very small scale or very detailed LCA analysis and stuff, and it's very hard to, so if you use this instrument, it's very hard to broaden your scope, because you also have to focus on a very narrow, it's even more narrow, otherwise you cannot use this method and approach. So I guess there you also kind of have your limitations. And the third development I found was, it was very interesting to watch their tensions when we had a very strange debate in one of the, so we had different groups in which we debated, and then a broader audience. And in one of these groups, they had a very interesting debate about sufficiency. So one of the scholars was very convinced that sufficiency was too broad a concept, was not well defined, and we couldn't include it. So we wanted to include it because it was there in the corpus. And then they were fighting half an hour about this. And then another scholar said, well, circular economy is also not very well defined. So they were saying the circular economy needs to be in and sufficiently is too broad or something, and fighting about this for half an hour. I think this surfaced some of the deep-rooted convictions also. And I think that also, it helped to just, talk about it, and it's not often done. So even at conferences, maybe there are not too many instances where you can talk about it when you present not very specific work in very specific sections and so on. Yeah, so for me, these three things were the main interesting things about this process.
Just really quickly, sorry, I couldn't quite remember. You had 54 respondents.
Yeah.
And how many were in the optimist side and how many were in, did you say that already?
No, I didn't say, because we didn't map them onto the narratives, because the thing is, these narratives, let's say,
they're kind of fluid.
Yeah, they represent the extremes of the debate.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, I have this and I totally adhere to this narrative. So you always find elements of the other narratives also in statements. No, it's not super clear cut. Mm-hmm. So not everyone has some people have, but most people have kind of in between. Mm-hmm. So these narratives are not representative of groups. They are more meant to map the debate and show what are the extreme ends and how do they diverge.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Oh, I
Um,
was gonna say,
yeah, Kelly, I think has one, and then I would like to say something too. Does anybody else have something they? Should I take a tally? Yeah. Anyone else? Noah again? Yeah. Okay.
we've got a big discussion.
So we'll go. Yeah. Why don't we start with Kelly, and then maybe I can say something, and then we'll go around to the rest of the group. Okay. Thanks, Kelly.
Hi, can you hear me, see me?
Yeah.
I wrote something really long in the chat just so I didn't lose my train of thought, but really I love this. Thank you. I loved your opening and the invitation, you know, about the cup and where you go with all that and full cost accounting. But I was really intrigued with the last statement you had on the slide and what you made about respecting the narrative, don't fight it with your single stories. And I feel like I could feel into that, and that is intriguing and exciting. But I feel a craving to ask you to say more about that, because part of me thinks about, you know, all the, and you just kind of talked about it a little bit in the in response to the last question. I kind of felt you implying or saying that, you know, these narratives that are at work create the conditions for these conversations that don't usually happen, and perspective taking. And what I'm really interested in, I work in applied ethics, embodied ethics, and I'm really interested in the more subtle realm of what's really happening in our bodies, in our minds, our moral cognition, in these choices. What is it that actually influences change? And I think what you might be pointing at is how these narratives and using them kind of create the conditions or invitations for those shifts that need to happen in each one of us, whether we're the individual citizen or whether we're the you know, the prime minister, because we might have everyday acts, we might have policy implications, we might have decisions about, you know, economic decisions and what happens to the land or whatever. But I can't help but think it all, in a way, no matter what level we're talking about of impact or shift or change or not change, really comes down to individual awareness, to the ability to notice and make choices. And then that of course becomes collective, or potentially becomes collective. So I was thinking along these lines, and maybe it's totally irrelevant to what you're saying, but I wanted to ask you, could you say just a little bit more about it seems like an invitation your last statement leaves us with.
Yeah, maybe I can also share a bit more about the limitations that we learned about when using this approach. So one big limitation I see is that no, you cannot force people to be aware or to take part in these, or no, like to engage in a meaningful way. So there are always ways also to like avoid that, so not participate, or you know, disrupt discussions and so on, right? So this is also an individual choice that can happen. So they are not. So you can try to use these to open debates and to foster also individual development in your thought, and trying to integrate more of these elements in a policy process, for instance. But it's not automatic, and you can obviously also undermine it, like every social process, right? If there are people who want to undermine it, it's possible. And there are like methods to like avoid or mitigate that, but it's always a risk. Yeah. So I think we cannot force also individual awareness and change if people don't want to. So it's a tool that can help people. But this individual process, like they need to be in a way open to it. And I think the narratives have to foster like social dynamics, because they also don't divide in groups, or they don't point fingers, but they are more to map like perspectives, and that sometimes helps. But it's not like a miracle tool or something, right?
Well, if I could ask two questions. One is about methodology, and one is about definitions. And I think this might also help with the overall conversation. But I'm really curious about methodology, because I know you've been working on this for many years, and you have this flagship paper on the discursive agency approach. And I'm just curious about methodologically whether that fits into maybe the first part about analysis and how that fits in. And maybe you can just comment a little bit on your methodological approach, because I understand it's highly qualitative, but maybe I'm wrong. And you know, the difference between like reviewing documents or newspaper articles to understand the narratives versus inviting select people, you know, it's kind of can have major implications on how you define and describe what the narrative is. So would you say that narrative-led dialogue is kind of more like a culmination of your many years of working on this and realizing, okay, we really need to get people in the room talking about this, because looking at existing like online information is just not enough, and looking at government documents to define the narrative is not enough. So anyway, just kind of thinking about the methodology here, and maybe you could describe that a little bit more. And then my second question is about how you define narratives, because I think that it might also get to the question, like, what are we getting at as the root cause here? Because when I think about the term circular economy, I think you don't mean that circular economy in and of itself is a narrative. It's like more of those Venn diagrams are the narrative around this. And so thinking about like, how do we define what a narrative is and what a narrative isn't? Because thinking about sustainability transformations, like, is that a narrative in and of itself, or then do you have to go deeper? And this kind of fits also into your methodology. Like, how do you then define what a narrative is? Like, when is it like, okay, now I understand that this is a narrative, and it's like distinct from, you know, because when I think about circular economy, I think like, okay, it's an industrial process, or it's a way to regulate business to make them take responsibility for their waste. But like, so are those the narratives versus circular economy? Yeah.
So circular economy would be more like what we call the discourse, so the overarching debate that can have several narratives. And the narrative we extract usually from either documents, from interviews, from surveys, from media, or even Twitter or whatever. And you can do that quantitatively as well as qualitatively. What you always need is, so a narrative, so we use a lot of Martin Hayek's approach of argumentative discourse analysis, who proposes that a narrative always has a problem, cause, consequence, solution. And it has what I suggested here. So the older work says it needs some sort of plot, it needs actors, and it needs a clear moral. And if you can identify these elements, then it becomes a narrative. The limitation always is these things. So we usually make it term-based. So we use narratives about circular economy specifically, not about recycling only, or no. Because at some point you need to, that's what I was talking about, you need to define the scope somehow, or you need to limit, because otherwise it's about everything. So it's often the term that limits. And in our previous work, I guess, Alexander, yours is similar. The topic defines the term, like the EUDR, for instance. So the policy process defines the term. And here what defined the term in the literature was the term circular economy. So we specifically decided, because otherwise, no, you would have to integrate a lot of research from, I don't know, 100 years back or something. And at some point you need to have a cutoff point, because otherwise it's not manageable. You cannot like create the data, or you can create, but then you cannot analyze it anymore. And this problem, cause, consequence, solution, like this raster or the coding, you can do also qualitatively, but now, like with AI and stuff, you can sometimes also use quantitative tools to just extract this partly. But I would argue that a human always needs to check. And in terms of the methods and my previous work on the discursive agency approach, so for me, these narrative-led dialogues, let's say, are a complement to discursive agency, because the analysis we did in the past, also together with you and others, were mainly focused on like extracting the narratives, understanding them, understanding the stakeholder landscape and the strategies to use to foster their own position and narrative, and in a way win the argument, let's say. And I felt that this, in general, like to map and document it was helpful also for stakeholders. So I got a lot of feedback from previous work that our work was also helpful for them to understand better. And then it was kind of a natural progression to say, okay, why don't we like just invite also, like, if you do a lot of work analyzing these people and their narratives and everything, why don't you just also share it with them? And maybe it helps them even more if they can discuss it and reflect on it and give feedback. So it was basically based on the work that I did on discursive agency, so how people try to create narratives and be meaningful. Because often, so especially in our research on chemicals, the debate has been so polarized and the narrative so strong that there was basically no forum at the EU level for them to speak to each other anymore. So we did a round of workshops and they were saying, oh, wow, we are so happy you did this because we don't have any forum to talk to each other anymore. It's so polarized, they don't meet. So they felt like, good, all these scientists, okay, we can trust them, maybe we can go. To at least discuss the issue at all.
This is only scientists working on it, or was it other stakeholders as well?
So we as scientists extracted the narratives and like from documents and interviews, and then invited the stakeholders to meet, presented the narratives, and did the discussion and presented the contradictions and let them discuss on it.
So this is separate than the 54 scientists.
Yes, this was a separate. So this is a separate project. So this was with scientists. What I presented was what we did with scientists, and the other one was what we did with stakeholders on chemicals policy. And apparently they perceived scientists, let's say, as a neutral ground. I wouldn't say we are super neutral, but that's how they perceived it, and that helped them to reflect on their own narratives.
Thanks. All right. So I think we'll just go around 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no, I was saying for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I think it's kind of like a report of years of work. Yes, am I right? Like, because it's really dense to understand what is going on. That I like the process. You started talking with these people somehow. Can you say thematizing them and extracting these narratives and then exposing them again to their own thoughts, and perhaps they saw what is going on. And I might have 1 or 2 comments and 1 question. One is really specific. I like the way that you somehow deconstruct the narrative behind the like one time using co-ops, that it reminds me of the Red Queen effect in complex systems. Like, have you heard of it? It's just technically saying that in complex systems, when you try to intervene, you complexify it. And that's the paradox. You think that you are trying to simplify that and you solve it. So like you find a solution, you're trying to solve it, and it unintentionally or without your control, you complexify that. And that's
the
Red Queen effect, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is interesting. And so many people are theorizing on something like that. Like, we have the paradox of technology that is technically saying that whatever you invent as if it is going to give us more time or more leisure, it is making it harder. Like the paradox of machine as well. That so many people thought that when the machine is coming, life is easier, but people came out from the farm in the industrial age and they worked 16 hours a day in factories. AI is doing the same. Yeah, we can't technically write our own stuff. Have to double, triple, and I don't know how many check. so that can be something interesting. Another one is that I like that you mentioned the question of scale, which is interesting. Maybe a part of these comments can be framed in the question of the scale, like what do we consider the narrative? On what stage we are like stopped in? Like, is it just this opinion that if I don't use it, it will be better? Or even thinking about that sustainability can be part of a bigger narrative, or even thinking about why it is good to protect the nature. It is itself a kind of narrative, which is, I think, a kind of these are narratives, discourse, ideologies, things like that. They are somehow secularized terminologies of the same ideas that we've been engaged for years, like thinking about sacred history, doctrine, axioms, like all of them that worldviews that were leading human life, that like us. Why? So we have to persuade ourselves what is a good life, and in that good life, sustainability can be a value. And in pursuing that, let's do this or that, for example. So where we stop, so we can say this is the root cause, this is the root cause, this is the root cause, or what? It can be maybe for another thought endeavors, linking that to what we said, that the problem of scale, which will be interesting. But my question is something that I was thinking about, a kind of a reverse effect, perhaps, in carving out these narratives. So you can't technically say that much objective. We don't have the objectivity in that sense. So you are exposed to some narratives. So you are, as a researcher, I mean, for example, doing that. I want to do that the same, for example, with some other people. I have some ideas. Now I learn, for example, this diagram from you. From now on, to whomever I talk about, I have these three frameworks, like technology, community, industry, technology, community, and state and law. So whoever is talking, I'm trying unconsciously to put it inside these three. So how I will be able, as a researcher, to carve out narratives of people, how they are thinking. Not saying that with really taking out my effect, but really reducing the effect of my own thoughts and narratives, or my conceptions of narratives.
Well, so this approach is a constructivist approach. So it acknowledges like the research's limitations and on narratives as well. For instance, through positionality statements. So we're not actively trying to, obviously, we try to represent as much as possible the data, but always within the frame of our own like interpretation. And we also present it as our own interpretation. So sometimes in the meetings, also different interpretations come up. So not everyone always agrees on every little detail, right? So because when someone else does it, maybe it looks a little bit different. And my experience is actually it might look a little bit different, but it's not totally, out there or something completely different. So there is a certain level of agreement, let's say, on the interpretations that you can reach. Obviously, you always have also like misunderstandings. So you think you understand the same way the other person understands, and in the end, you don't, right? But this is part of the process. This is a normal communication problem or matter. So you will not erase, and we are not trying to erase that. We acknowledge it, but you have to work with it somehow within these limitations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mine's a little similar to that, but I'm wondering, kind of back to my original question of like politics and how these things map. Like, can you then kind of go a step forward, or maybe it's like backward, and see the influences that have caused that? Like, for example, the tech and business one, like what's the influence of like lobbying, for example, on that like approach? And maybe in academia, like what's the influence of like your particular field? Because I think like academic disciplines have very different like kind of philosophies behind them. So do those things kind of like, you know, have a, is that something you're looking at, or are you kind of starting just with the narrative?
So with this particular study, I did a previous study before trying to understand where the topic of circular or the term came from in the EU, because it emerged in the 2010s. So I traced back the idea to its very origin, and it originated. I mean, the term has been existing since the 60s or something, so it's not new, but it wasn't as fashionable, and it only became fashionable because the DG Environment at the EU level took it from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who developed this term and was very vocal on it in the 2010s. They took it over because they felt it was a good way to present or to strengthen environmental concerns in an environment that was perceived as very business focused. And I thought the circular economy was perfect in a way because it allowed to package environmental concerns into like economic programs. This is how they presented it. What happened is that the DG Environment and DG Grow got merged. So the Commission decided to merge their efforts in developing circular economy. So it became very strongly optimistic, so more on the optimist side due to this cooperation. And due to the very idea to merge economic and environmental concerns in the EU. And I think part of like the distribution of the scholarly debates is also due to how the political debates are framed. So as I said, now when we create our narratives, we frame it in terms of current events or political statement, and like you find anchors. And these anchors obviously also shape your own narrative in a way. And research funding in the EU, as I guess is the same case here, also usually tends to give more funding to more technological engineering, environmental sciences than, let's say, more critical social science. No, this is also an issue. This is a bit out of the scope, so I didn't study that, but I know the background, so the context. So if you contextualize it, you understand why this is the case. Yeah. So in this particular case, I do know the background.
Yeah. I have a question about the media. So I heard at some point you mentioned that like news media was a source that you attribute to like pull information about these narratives and in your analysis process.
Not here, not in this example. You can use media, but here we didn't. So this was all like document, interview, survey based, or group discussion based. Yeah.
Then generally, I guess you can speak to a little bit how your research does or doesn't engage with media. Throughout your presentation, I was thinking lots about how like there's debates within the scholarly community, there's debates within different disciplines, but there's also debates about scholarship and about science as exists within media. And I was thinking about the tendency towards sensationalism and the creation of false dichotomies that exist within news, that exist within print media. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak to a little bit about how your research engages with that, if at all.
So in my previous work, I have never done a media analysis only using media. I know this exists, so you can do it, but I myself have never done it. So when we use media, it was often like to complement, especially when you have a corpus that is relatively scarce. So some debates are very focused. And then we sometimes integrate media articles that are interviews with people or that have different statements of different stakeholders and kind of try to draw. And this is often also, let's say, like political or very stakeholder debate focused media. It's not like it's not tabloid media or something. So it's usually very stakeholder focused, and we try to integrate it cautiously because you always also have these media filters. So we use it mainly as a complement. I haven't done like a media analysis only looking at media, but I think if you do it, you would need to look at then where does the corpus come from? So which publishing houses or which groups of journalists or something, and try to understand to what extent they influence them, because then that would be kind of their debate.
My follow-up question was, would you ever consider, or would you think it would be valuable to engage with media or journalism as a sector and have these sort of debates and conversations and unveiling of narratives for the people engaging in those discussions within media, similarly as you have with scholarly community, similarly as you have with stakeholders? Is that would be a direction you would look to?
Yeah, I think it would be a good, as I have met a journalist who actually does that, like she doesn't use like narratives, but she tries to bring together journalists to uncover new ways of presenting, especially climate and environmental issues, because she also feels that like certain narratives drive a lot of their work, and it might be very narrow. So I know there are people trying to do that in their profession. You could also use this analysis for that, but I haven't tried it. But yeah, I think it might be very interesting, actually. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. Because I am a researcher working with circular economy. I work with waste pickers, so they are part of the informal circular economy. And our research is trying to analyze and measure how they contribute to the circular economy systems, even without recognition and payment and everything. And it was interesting to try to see where I am in that figure, because I came from engineering in Brazil, and there most of researchers, they are very optimists, but I don't agree with them. I always worked with the social part of it. But yeah, I was thinking a lot about this, how I should take care when I'm talking about the private sector, because sometimes I'm so angry with them because how they treat these people and how it's difficult to talk with them. And even for research, when you try to talk with companies, most of the time they don't want to talk about this. And when you go to waste speakers, they really want to talk, they want to have their voices heard and everything. So sometimes it's hard to do this, but it was interesting to listen about this, because I need to pay attention to this when I'm writing and everything. So thank you for your presentation.
Thanks for your comment.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I was, yeah, go.
I have one question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I was gonna.
Tinkerbell is calling.
Yeah.
Can
Do you want to ask it? Yeah, now. Or?
It's just, I was just wondering, like in the European context, because I'm always thinking about the environment and stuff from my own growing up in Canada, Vancouver Island, but Indigenous values, environment, like that sort of the right side of your Venn diagrams. But I was just wondering, I was really fascinated with Pope Leo's release of his big paper that he wrote about like anti-tech, basically calling for like massive regulation of the technology industry. I'm just wondering like how you see that, like that curve going in terms of the optimists, like they're kind of more like tech driven or consumer driven approaches. I don't know.
One development that I've noticed over the years is also in these, like when you map these different narratives and you do the Venn diagrams, and you find certain concerns that are not addressed at all and pushed to the side for whatever reason, like to make the narrative clearer or to just not acknowledge them. They tend to resurface again, and oftentimes stronger than the first time, because people tend to group around them, so they tend to grow over time. And I think this is a phenomenon of that. So I mean, the Pope is like not really a political alien, but so part of my motivation to do these exercises is also, I think, if you acknowledge certain elements that appear in the debate early, you solve yourself a lot of, like, you spare yourself a lot of trouble later. because they will not magically disappear. Now, even if you push them to the side, like it can also be problematic for the entire process over time. And it can lead to situations like in the chemicals policy realm where, you know, you get more and more divided and it gets more and more difficult to come to any solution. And oftentimes, if you don't have regulation or you stall it for very long, both groups get like feel the consequence, like the negative consequences. So you always think, oh, if we don't have regulation, it's good for business. It's not always good for business and not always good for all business. So sometimes it's good for some business, but not for many others. And then like these dynamics, you know, like start. So I think like this encyclical, right, is like a phenomenon of that these concerns will emerge more and more because more and more people will group around them. But it might still take some time to like find good solutions.
Yeah. Great. Well, I would like to really thank Sina so much for this amazing lecture and everyone for their engagement. I think that there's a huge testament to all the questions to the keen interest in this approach to analyzing environmental politics and how important it is to take a step back and think about what are the stories we're telling and what might be the implications of that. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing work with us. And I think we can all give a round of applause to Sina. And like I said, Sina is around for quite some time, so reach out and follow up and leave your email, let me know.
Thank you, Sophia and Sina.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Oh my gosh, of course. That is so interesting. Oh, here's all your online thank yous.